There we go. All right. I am calling this Durham Housing Task Force to order. It's December 9th, 2024. And we have Mike Mulhern on Zoom. And
Good morning.
Good morning. We do not have a quorum. I don't know if we're going to get any more people. I suspect we should be getting some more people.
Well, Michael Saputo cannot make it, and Heather can't make it.
Oh, Heather can't make it? Okay. All right, so we're going to just do what we're going to do.
We'll have an informal chat.
We'll have an informal chat. Actually, that's probably a good one for this. So, Mike, if you want to say something, just yell.
I will do that.
Okay, because I can't be guaranteed I will see the little polite Zoom hand raise. So just
jump right in.
Just jump right in. Just pretend you've got something to say. Or actually, just say it. You don't have to pretend. Okay. So we are. Do we need to do a roll call? Who's here? We don't.
Well, we should just
We'll do it.
yeah.
Who's here?
Yeah.
We'll start with Paul.
Paul Rasmussen, Planning Board.
Michael Barron, Town Planner.
And Sally Tobias.
Al Holland.
And
Mike Mulhern.
Mike Mulhern.
Oh, and I should just note that Heather Grant and Michael Saputo can't make it.
All right. So the other two we don't know.
But I have not heard from Judith or Eileen.
It's yeah. We haven't heard from Taylor Craig.
Or Taylor or Mimi.
But that's fine. We'll have to talk to Mimi because I think she's been pretty busy having children. She's had her third.
Wow.
I think it's her third.
Oh, I thought it was second.
Maybe it's her. Is it her second?
Oh, I'll call Mimi and find out.
I don't know. If it's her third, then that's what changes. Anyways. So so what we don't have a quorum, so we can't do anything. So we're just going to chat, which is actually a good thing for this particular one. I have got I think it was time to start pulling ideas together for the recommendations for changes to zoning. Anybody have their thoughts on that? We did it once before. Paul, well, you weren't on it at that time. You were on the planning board. You were lucky to be on the planning board too. Yeah, you're the one who basically told us to go take it. And our suggestions back in 22.
And you're right, because it was,
Did not receive.
and a lot of that had to do with just the presentation model, because it was that was more of an identification of things that should be looked at, as opposed to saying, these are the changes that should be made.
Right. Anyway, since then, though, we've had a lot. We actually, it was a pretty, back, that was in 22 we made those recommendations. We kind of went through it, and, I mean, you were there.
Yeah.
And Heather was there. Heather was chair at the time, I believe. And we had some different members. And we pretty much went through everything and kind of tweaked everything. But since then, we have had a housing assessment done. And we have started some outreach. We have some feedback from the community. There's Taylor. Yeah, that's a problem. And Taylor Cray is here, and you are Taylor Cray from the
Workforce Housing Coalition.
Workforce Housing Coalition. Glad to see you. Anyways, we're just going through, we don't have a quorum, so we're not going to make any decisions, but we're going to start talking about what are our options and thoughts on possible changes. This is an old, oh, you can't see it up there yet. Can we see this? Yeah, there it is. This is an old one from 2020 that Michael Barron did when we first started. This is actually when we first started. This is during COVID. And this is an old COVID bring it back. And just talking about what we can look at. So these are some of the things that we have in existence today. So I'm just going to start looking at it. That little house on the bottom left-hand corner. Oh, you can see my mouse. Yay. That's like over in the faculty, isn't it? It's a weird little.
right on the
Wow.
river.
Yeah,
it's like a hobbit house.
It's
Looks
a hobbit
like the
house.
Shire, yeah.
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 Holy
Yeah.
cool.
It's actually
Very
kind of
cool.
cute. It's pretty nifty.
They have a little natatorium in there.
Really?
Yeah,
That's neat.
small swimming pool.
All right. That's actually
Yes,
pretty
I know exactly.
Anyway, so these are residential subdivisions from 2010 to 2020. Just what we've got, what's happened. Michael, could you maybe explain this a little bit as far as in where we're at subdivisions in the town?
So this presentation was 4 years ago. This is just showing the subdivisions we had for the prior 10 years, which is pretty much the same case today. That nothing real, not significant. The only subdivision more than 3 lots, well, almost every subdivision was just creating 1 new lot. And there was 1 case of 2 new lots, 1 case of 3 new lots, and 1 case of 7. But the days of 12, 20 lot subdivisions seem long gone.
So these were, people took their land, they cut it up, and then they created just 1 new lot. And that was these probably reflect the minimum lot sizes.
And the
For-
few that we've had since 2020, most of them have been not for creating new buildable lots.
No,
A lot
Right.
of those new lots have been going into conservation directly.
yeah, that's true. Because we have done some, but they're not for building. The only one we have down there is Garish Drive. That may sound familiar to somebody here on the committee.
Yes, yes, it does.
Where is that? Where are you in Garrett Drive?
If you go down Canny.
No, I know where it is.
In
I
the
mean,
process.
In the process, where?
Oh,
Yeah.
they're done.
Well-
Michael can explain.
It's 18 units, one of which is the home that we live in, and we're out of the legal system. I mean, the Superior Court twice, Supreme Court once,
Wow.
that is all finalized.
And how many years did that take?
We've been working on this for 6.5 years.
Well, I mean, how long were you stuck in the legal system?
Oh, probably a good, approaching 3 years.
Wow.
Oh, half the time.
Yeah, and it's been just a grind from day one on it. Right now, with the last precedent condition, well, I mean, there's a number of them, but one that needs to be addressed is the sewer. So we are working with Horizon Engineering to finalize an exception to New Hampshire DES for a low impact, a low pressure system, which I guess is now off the approved.
Oh,
Yeah, oh no, so it's just really a
Maybe
final
Michael-
technical, it's a final technical thing dealing
Yeah.
with the sewer system, and that's the only outstanding item. And, they're gonna check off their precedent conditions and then should be ready to go.
okay,
Finally.
Judith has entered the room, so we will recognize Judith Spang. Did you have anything more to add, Michael, on that?
No, not really. We're working diligently with Horizon Engineers to get it completed. It's been on the docket for over 1.5 years now, so we'll be finished with that shortly.
And it is it's actually important to note that the Garish Drive, that was done under the density, you were in B, residential
Yeah.
B, so you had a bit smaller lot size, and you built over 55, so you got a bit of a density bump. You were able to create more density, so that's where you were able to actually get in 18 units, right?
That's correct. Yeah, it's 55 and older, and it's a pocket neighborhood. It's going to be absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, it
So,
will be, it will
yeah.
be, yeah. So that is important to note, that these residential subdivisions have not created a lot of housing, but have created some. But with the ability to have that density, even for over 55, that does create housing, that you got considerable more than, say, 1, 2, 3 lots, you got 18. Now these are, Judith, just in case you don't know, this is an old PowerPoint presentation that Michael Barrett did, and we're just going through it because it gives us an overview of what's in town. We want to just be talking about possible suggestions to zoning changes now that we have a lot of feedback from the community. Anyways, there are 38 vacant lots of 5 acres and greater. Has that changed any, you think, Michael, in the past few years?
No.
So we haven't had any building in, so this is, wow. nothing has started in the past 4 years at all.
I mean, there may have been a couple of lots with 6, 7, 8 acres that there's a new single-family
No,
house on. but-
That's, those 25 lots, that's not town-wide, is it? That's just in the residential zones?
Oh,
25
no,
lots, 10
that's,
acres or greater?
townwide.
That's town-wide,
Yeah.
okay.
And these are lots that are not
Well,
somehow.
I mean, so, some of those are active farms and things like that.
These are just
Yeah.
lots of 5 acres or greater. They may be using them for farming, or, are any of these in current use?
Oh, probably a lot of
most
them.
right?
Well, minimum 10 acres, but probably majority of over 10 acres are in current use.
Don't we have, isn't, you know, I hate to push the workforce overlay, but now Orly and the coastal, those are impacted by the workforce housing overlay district that we're talking about?
Only one of the lots in coastal, and
Is any in Orly?
there'd be 4-ish that would fall within the overlay, I believe. They're all owned by the Woodman family, I believe.
They're all the ones that are all.
If we're looking at vacant lots, anyway, yeah.
And none of them are impacted by wetlands or zoning or,
That, we don't know.
They probably have. There's probably.
I mean, almost every lot in town is affected by wetlands. Anything that's that size anyway is going to have a
Absolutely.
wetland on it somewhere.
So the buildable space on each of these would still be up for determination. I mean, because these
I
are
mean-
just, this is just, you know,
Most of the lots in Faculty neighborhood are affected by the wetlands. So that you have to sort of keep that in mind, between the river and the wet spots that are in the middle of the neighborhood and stuff. I mean, that's, the wetlands is just something that controls what you can do, where on the
Where.
property. It doesn't, it's not a big stop sign.
they would just work around it.
I don't remember the name of that road off of Packers Falls Road, where the tiles are actually popping off of everything in the bottom floor because it was in wetlands. It's
Wow.
for some time ago, before we had our wetlands ordinance.
Wow. A little damp.
Oh, but then this is another piece of what you were sort of asking. Other lots that are developable that have just a single-family house on them.
Wow.
So these are single-family lots of 5 acres and greater that have single-family homes on them now? Is that what you're saying?
So that's a lot.
Oh, so
Well,
these
if you look
have
at the
homes
bottom-
on them?
Yes and no. So there's always a second filter you need to look at when you look at a list like this. All right? Like, again, how many of those that are in the rural and the RC zones are farms? So it's like, yeah, it's a single family thing, but it's got 7 outbuildings on it and cows or whatever. I think the ones you need to focus on though are like the RB, the RA, and why do we have, oh, that R/RC district means the lot spans both,
Oh, no, it's,
the third row?
oh, yeah, I guess. Oh, right, like on Durham Point Road.
Yeah,
Oh, RRC, yeah.
yeah, so there's, I'm just saying, anyone who might be looking at this chart, we're not saying all of those lots need to be developed. We're-
Right, yeah, and I think that's important to note that this shouldn't be something we say, oh, well, look at what could be developed, because they're probably, if they already have homes on them, and the families, you know, are happy with that, they're not going to, and some of it may not really have an option to, it may not be appropriate for them, or their desire to subdivide and build on them.
I mean, there definitely are 2 options there. I mean, one of the filters you look at as well, of course, is, you know, for RA and RB is infill. And for R and RC, you're just looking at, you know, maybe I can put a second house on there and rent it and have extra income to keep the rest of the place running.
Yeah.
Or
I
even
mean,
a small
those
subdivision, yeah.
Those are valid options
Yeah.
that we would need to be able to allow, but not force, right? That's the other thing that I think people get. They're afraid that the minute you allow something, it all becomes, it's the same as forcing it in, and it's not.
Yeah, I think when it comes to minimum lot sizes in the districts themselves, I think that's where it gets touchier with like saying, oh, well, we could just say RA can be a half an acre, or RA can be a quarter of an acre, or RB should be a half an acre. That's where, or R should only be 1 acre or something like that. That's where it starts to get more concern. I think the community says, oh, what are you doing? You know, so I'm not sure how we really want to look at that and what our options are, in my opinion.
You know, when I look at that, because the thing that really stands out when you look at the 157 single-family lots, the first two, it's like, what is that, you know, over 110 are sitting in rural and residential C. The rural district open areas, especially farms, are incredibly beautiful. I mean, to start with that.
Yeah.
But it's like really challenging, I think, for those farm owners that own that chunk of land that's worth a lot of money and you're getting taxed on. And I don't know how you may protect those. So, and this, I think that also applies to the coastal. As much as we'd like the Gold Coast somewhere of like Miami along the Great Bay,
I don't think so.
I think those are really challenging lots that come in when we talk about gateways and like conservation land, and so I think those are really challenging.
The way, if we wanted to look at it, the way I would handle it is, and we would need some new language, as in new vocabulary, because our current vocabulary is, you know, as they say, your language restricts your thought processes, right? And the concept I have is, and yeah, we just had a site walk down there on Durham Point Road last week, right? And it's a huge lot because it goes all the way from Durham Point Road to the water, and which could be, you know, 2,000 feet. But rather than saying, oh, the minimum lot size is X, it's like, no, we should be saying you can have more than one house on the lot, but they need to be clustered, not spread out,
Right.
okay? And that becomes, the challenge is how do you create that cluster feel on a single piece of property? Kind of like what a conservation subdivision is, but not saying, oh, it has to be, you know, but just saying, just do this. Just do this, and do this with any number of houses that you want.
Yeah.
But, and that's what, we don't have the zoning that allows that to happen right now. We have conservation subdivisions, and I think it would be a good idea to, because our conservation subdivisions still follow these minimum lot sizes.
No, it does. Conservation subdivision is very flexible.
Well,
It's
yeah,
just
but-
that the density is very low.
When does that kick in? I can't remember. I should know this, but
If
is
you,
it four
more.
Four more?
Yeah.
No, because if you're if you want to do a conservation subdivision in Residence A, you would be, you could go with the 20,000 square foot per unit, right?
Well, the density is very low, but you know, you can then, it's very flexible how you lay it out, as long as you have the minimum open space.
What about less? I mean, I think that's kind of what Paul was talking about. Like, you're not big enough to be a conservation subdivision because you're not four separate lots, but you only have 2 lots or say 3 lots. How does that work?
You're not allowed
Yeah.
to. Because that
No, you
becomes,
have to have-
because that drops you into the duplex or
Oh, okay.
multi-unit type housing lot row where you're forbidden from doing it.
Okay.
All right, you can't put 2 single families on, I don't think you can put 2 single families on a lot now. There are 3 or 4 in town that are grandfathered into that, but you're just not allowed to do it.
No, you have to separate the land, don't you? Subdivide.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you have to do a conservation subdivision with any subdivision of 4 or more lots or units. But it doesn't say whether you have, so 3-lot subdivision is exempt. But if you want to add 1 house lot, could you do that as a I think you probably could do that as a,
I
well,
don't
I don't know,
think
it's, maybe we need to clarify that. It might be a helpful
point
thing
of order.
to allow.
Chair, point of
Yeah.
order. Are we at a quorum now?
No, we're not. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're still.
5.
Yeah.
But he's out. He's not here.
Oh, yeah.
He's not in
Okay.
the room.
Since we're not at a quorum then, and we have a guest, shall we invite the guest to the table? So that we
He doesn't
can-
No,
want
he doesn't want to.
Since, okay.
He's just
I'm
sitting
just saying,
there.
we're having an informal discussion
You
right
don't
now,
want-
so.
You don't want.
So, I mean, back, that was,
Unless you
Just-
want to, we do have a
no.
public comments time.
Just, do you have anything you want to say? No, you're good.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay, just leave him
There we
alone.
go.
Just leave the poor guy
I mean,
alone.
my take to that was like, if you're doing, so you, it's not a conservation subdivision because you're subdividing the lot to less than 4. And
Then it has to be a standard subdivision where minimum lot size has to be whatever the minimum lot size is. And if you have this
Which would
big,
be
huge
back.
piece, I mean, then you run into this whole issue on any of these subdivisions of who gets the water rights. Do you want to be are you just creating more road cuts on a road which is already tricky to navigate?
Sure.
Whereas, you know, but you have these long driveways. Why not plop a couple of more houses along the long driveway, and where everybody sort of has shared access to the water? You know, these are things. Or I want to build a second house for my kid,
yep.
right, and keep them close. But I don't want to have to break. But because I would have to break up the land, that becomes a major mess. So so the question is this something we can somehow implement?
Do you apply then the rules of the conservation subdivision to less than 4 and just say, okay, because I mean, you're going to get tangled, you want a cluster, you can't quite make 4 lots on the 2,000, and you're only going to put, say, 3 on there. Don't you still want to do the same things that you would have done in the conservation subdivision?
I would run this one. This is one where I need to put it more in the hands of the planning board. All right, when you're playing with that zone that's less
Yep.
than, you have to write out what the goals are, and then let the planning board say, is this project hitting these goals?
Yep.
Right, so the goals are, we don't want to be adding a lot more driveway/road. We don't want to be, we want to be, protecting, minimizing clearing. We
Yeah.
want to be protecting the overlay districts. for the-
Runoff and all that.
and all that stuff, right? But if they can do that, then why not give because each one of these pieces of property that we're looking at is different. If you try to write a hard set of rules that's going to be good for all of them, it's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
So how would you word that?
We
as
we
to-
could
as a
actually.
suggestion.
I would like our town planner to mull that over for a little bit.
Yeah, because it could be interesting, and I think that at this level, we're gonna come up with ideas. I don't think we're gonna figure out
Right.
all the zoning. That's up to the planning
Yeah.
board.
Well, actually, I don't, there's the ordinance, it says if it's a 2 or 3 lot subdivision, you're exempt. Does that mean if it's a 2 or 3 lot subdivision, you're not allowed to do it? I'm not sure. But it wouldn't hurt to add a simple one line to this and say, even if, a property owner may do a conservation subdivision following these rules for 2 or 3 sub-lot at their option.
Sure.
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, it's a cumbersome process if you're going to but if you want to add 2 single-family houses on the same parcel without subdividing,
I think the
maybe
key
it's
there,
worth it.
the key is the ownership has to be all the same. If you're going to be selling alpha houses, then
You have to,
then you're going to have to go into a condo effect according to this. You either need to subdivide or you're converting the entire property into a
or you
condominium.
own the property, and
Well, Garrish Drive, that's what Garrish Drive is. It's, whatever, I
It's
forget the number.
condo. Yeah,
It's going to be a
18.
condo, so it's one parcel. There's no subdivision except limited common area. And they'll all be sold as condos.
Do they have like a homeowners association
yeah,
under
they'll have
that
home,
then?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a condo.
A minimum one is required, I believe, by the state laws.
I have a concern about a situation where we are allowing, by the discretion of the planning board, allowing exceptions, and then someone else comes along with something that isn't quite as good, And it's up to the discretion of the planning board, which then gives us into legal problems. So I really appreciate that if we're going to have a forward-thinking set of regulations, we have to allow flexibility. But there is a downside to flexibility.
There has to be some, I agree, there has to be some,
Well, this is for the ability to add an extra single-family house or a two-family house onto an existing thing. If it was going to be large enough to trigger the conservation subdivision rules, then it has to go into conservation subdivision.
Yeah.
but there would have to be some guidelines as to, that the planning board would have to be required to, it can't be 100% at their discretion. Because planning boards
No,
change and.
I agree, but and that's why I say you have to set out the rules. It's like, here's the box
Yeah.
you have to fit in. If you fit in with that, then, you know, there might need to be a little bit of leeway, right? With regards to something. Until you start building what that box is, it's hard to say necessarily.
That's
where
what a
that leeway
variance
might
is
be
for,
allowed.
isn't
I was
it?
gonna say, you can always get a
Yeah, you
variance.
wouldn't. There's one, for example, there's one property, well, I'll mention it, it's no surprise. The property that was owned by Andrea Bodo and her late husband Steve, they've since moved to Lexington, Mass. But there were two regular single-family houses on their property on Route 108 next to the dam. And it was awkward. They were selling it, and they couldn't be subdivided as separate lots because they'd be too small, so it was non-conforming. And it's just very awkward for a buyer. Not a lot of buyers want to have two full single-family houses. You want to, so that
Yeah.
can be awkward.
But aren't you actually looking at your right, if you have the right to build a detached ADU at
that's a different
800
matter.
square feet, you can build an 800 square foot
1,000,
or 1,000.
if it goes through.
If it goes through at the state level, we could build 1,000 square foot ADU. That's
Pretty good.
that's bigger than my sister's ranch built in 1955. She has
Well, and that's
800
one of the
square foot
things
house.
that you've talked about, yeah.
You could build a small anyways by right. So, but I think you could do that and maintain the property yourself and not have to subdivide. But that's that's your rental property. If you were saying, I do have a larger piece of land and I'd like to, I have 3 acres, and if I subdivide it, I'm not going to be able to subdivide it and get the minimum lot size for B, but I'd like to have 2 separate homes on it. Is that kind of like what like say I'm in B, and I have to have a minimum of an acre. I have to have a minimum of an acre.
Well, I wasn't thinking about this for B. I was thinking of it more for the R and the RC areas.
Okay, so say if you're in R and you're at your minimum 3, I got 3 acres, but it's this huge 3 acres. I don't see any reason why I can't possibly build another home on there. It could work, but I can't because I can't meet the minimum lot size. But I don't want it to be an ADU because I want to have it gone. I want to sell that. I want to build that house myself. I want to sell because that's going to help me.
Well, that's where if that, I'm not sure I'd want to go again, with RB, I like the ADU idea, and in the RB area, it's 3 acres? It's not 3 acres.
Oh,
It's
and
acre and a half,
RB
isn't it?
is one.
RB
it's
is
40,000.
is 40,000.
Is 1 acre, right? So if I got to 3 acres, and in that case, I would say, you know, if I got that oversized lot in RB, I'd rather see it subdivided.
Yeah, I mean, I think 1,000 square feet is, okay, if you have 3 acres, 1,000 square foot, because I keep thinking about what we saw at Sophie Webb, Banner Drive. Those were like, I think, deed restricted 1,500 square foot units that were really nice. And it's like, I mean, I think you really want almost the second house, not just the ADU, or the flexibility of it. I mean, certainly, I don't know what'll happen in Concord, but there definitely is legislation coming through to allow detached ADUs by right. But I think, you know, it's maybe a better use of land to allow them to the option to go up to 1,500, whatever it is, a second home, because you're already into the cost of doing it anyway. You're going to have to pour a foundation and do all that. So I don't think in some of these lots that is going to be I mean, again, look at what the cost was of the Sophie Webb Banner Drive 1,500 square foot houses. That's a $600,000 place. So
It's
they're not
closer
going to be
to seven,
affordable,
but yeah.
or whatever. They're not going to be
Yeah.
affordable. I think
Well, they're attainable.
attainable or whatever, but I think that giving the homeowner flexibility to decide whether an ADU makes sense or whether they go through the added process of a subdivision so they can have another lot.
Yeah, I mean, are we overthinking this? I mean, because you have your minimum lot sizes, and I think changing minimum lot sizes in overall, it would be good if you had some flexibility. But when it comes to, if you have a large piece of land and you want to subdivide it as into a conservation subdivision, the Sophie Banner, those are all separate lots, right? So it's not like a development. It's a street with individual home sizes, but they were able to divide up small lots.
Yeah,
They're about-
But then in the back is a whole, like where the 3 buildings are in
Yeah.
the apartment barn. That's its own, like the individual
that's its
lots,
own.
but then that's its own sort of thing because those are like
That's
the
different.
development. Rob Boggle owns that area and like that they maintain it and everything. So but the other lots, the for sale homes. And the homes are not deed restricted. It's some of the apartments in the large, you know, those white buildings that we saw with the apartments in them.
Yep.
So
Some
some
of
of
them.
the apartments in those buildings are deed restricted at HUD Fair Market. But the
No, I
actual
thought
houses-
size. I thought the deed restriction was size, that they couldn't go over 1,500 square feet. So in other words,
Oh,
those
okay.
other houses, you couldn't say, okay, I bought this 1,500 square foot house,
gonna make it
and later subsequently come on and say, you know, I'm going to add an addition onto it. It was deed restricted to 1,500
Yeah,
square
that,
feet.
I think you're right about that. I think I was
Yeah,
just
they
thinking
couldn't go
about
any
the
bigger.
cost.
But
Yeah.
that's a large, those are
Yeah.
very, I mean, I think if anybody's ever wondering about density, they just need to move to California
So
for a
in
little
Lee
while.
and Madbury, there are a number of properties where you have separate houses, condos, because they share a driveway. I'm not sure what else they share. I think it's just the driveway. I mean, is that the type of thing where you were talking about in RB, where you got this extra oversized lot, put the second house on it, make it have them. The thing with those is they're 2 separate lots with a shared driveway.
Yeah.
And if we try to do that, then you're going to end up with the front and back, right?
Yeah.
Most of those lots that are oversized, they're not oversized. They got them. They're sort of at the minimum for their road requirement,
Yeah.
street requirement, and it's just that they're deep. So that kind of infill would be hard to do as a condominium because
I don't think it'd be.
Yeah, that would
Don't we
worth it.
still have
Yeah,
pork
that-
chop?
there's a
It's a
reason
conservation zone.
that the exemption is like 2 or 3 units, because, you know, if you have your own lot and you have an accessory unit, or even 2 accessory units, that's your own property.
Yeah.
You know who's running things.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you have one lot and there's 2 separate single-family houses, or even 3, it's too small for an association, and it becomes a problem with 2 or 3 separate owners on one lot.
Oh, yeah.
Now, an accessory units makes sense because I'm the boss.
Yeah.
And that's why 4 units and up, because it's worth an association.
They were saying, well, wait a second, there was this easement to get to the back of the property that was shared. I think it was a shared driveway even. And it opened up a huge can of worms between the neighbor and the ADU. And it would be even worse if it was a separate lot. Yeah.
People, you know, do not like shared driveways for 2 lots. And let alone 2 houses on one parcel where they share utilities or whatever, you know.
Michael,
the
how
backyard.
about
It's
the
like-
pork chop
What?
subdivision?
Pork chop subdivision.
What about the pork
Oh,
chop
those are
subdivision?
great, yeah, because that gives
Yeah,
flexibility.
so that allows some flexibility
But
if
they're
you
still
don't
all
have the
separate.
width.
But you have to have a
What
shared
is-
driveway.
Oh,
Right.
want to
What is
explain what a
that?
pork chop
That's-
subdivision is? You know what a pork chop is shaped like?
Yeah.
So you
flat.
have this come up, you come up, and then it
Okay, so it's just like-
It's a conservation
it's the
subdivision
shape.
where
Yeah,
you,
it has
But
like
it's
a
meat
thin,
shaped.
It's where you
enter,
Okay.
yeah, like
Yeah.
literally a pork chop.
Okay.
Yeah,
you-
no,
you
it's
have
a
a
really
skinny
great
way in.
tool. Say you have like a whole bunch of backland.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you want to create 2 or 3 lots,
Right.
but there's not enough frontage,
You.
to
So you
meet your
stick a little road
150.
in there.
So you have really
Okay.
limited frontage, but you still meet your lot size.
Okay.
And it's shared
That
driveway.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
So
very
you-
good tool.
So you can go in and skinny and then it opens up, like a pork
new
chop.
term. That's a new term.
It's a great tool, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to address this, reducing minimum lot sizes. In the first place, what are we after? Do we want people to be able to build more multi-mansions on one piece of property?
Yeah,
If our goal is to get more attainable housing, as you were saying, it doesn't mean that allowing more housing is going to get us more attainable housing.
Well, Judy, this is, I don't think you were,
Did you
look
get
at
one?
that thing that I passed out on the third sheet.
Yeah.
That's what the task force came up with 2 years ago, and all of that was sort of tabled. But this shows what the task force was thinking about density.
I
right
am,
The other thing that occurred to me from my experience on the planning board, where we had some very, very clever proposals of a development, where they were kind of skipping from one dry spot to another around the wetlands. And it occurred to me that reducing the lot sizes to a very small lot, like a quarter acre, allows somebody to do that, to fit in more houses in a mosaic of wetlands.
so that would be see, I think if our best bet for minimum lot sizes is to just tweak the conservation subdivision minimum lot sizes so that you could create more density in those conservation subdivisions and be able to do that so they can work around the wetlands
But
better.
I don't think we want to do that. That's a big problem when you develop in a mosaic of wetlands. So you're basically still impacting water quality and very much wildlife habitat.
the
We're
wildlife-
getting
Although,
a
So they
there's a
should
pretty
keep-
good buffer, though.
Well, they should
And the
stay.
Conservation Commission is working to increase it.
Or this wouldn't be in the conservation subdivision, this would be in a regular subdivision
Oh, in
with
a regular,
quarter
yeah.
acre lots.
We can only do conservation subdivisions.
But the wetland setback applies everywhere. I mean, the wetland setback now is, it's, in the R&RC zones, it's 100 feet, and everywhere else it's 75 feet.
Well,
So, it's pretty good.
The thing is, though, when it comes to the positioning of homes, the wildlife passages and things like that, because that's where, houses all over, I guess that's where you would have more issues. So it is about creating more density in a smaller area. But when you're looking at our conservation subdivisions, our minimum usable land, so minimum usable area unit in 3 districts are RC and Orly, which is where they're most likely to occur, has 150 square feet, or 3.44 acres. That's per unit, right?
Yeah.
That's 3 acres per unit.
Oh, it's more, well, it's,
For
yeah,
a
the
house. So you
conservation
get-
subdivision is
that's-
very low density.
So that's where your density needs to be increased.
You know what?
And just for so you take your land, you get your usable land, and then you say, okay, what's the density per unit? And then give them a lower density per unit, and then let them pack the houses in, but they have to stay within a,
Well, that's what I
Within a chunk.
wonder. Let me ask Judith this question. So with conservation subdivision, there's a lot of open space you have to keep, and it has to be clustered, which is the right way to do it. But the density is so low that even in that compact area, you can't get a lot of housing. What would you think about, we still have the large amount of open space you have to preserve, and you've got to concentrate your housing. What if we increase the density there? You're still having all that open space, all the protection for wetlands and streams. We're just allowing more housing in the compact area.
In that area.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, I think that,
What?
yes, I think we have to be very careful, and I remember fighting a big fight in the town of Meredith, where the town was fighting with a developer about whether they had to preserve the land along the lake. And they took him to court, and Patton Onen versus the town of Meredith, and the court found that the planning board could tell them where that open space
Could or
had.
could not?
Could.
Yes.
So
How do we do that?
I think that is critical, because you want to be, we're now hearing about stormwater management, and that very much depends upon the topography of where those lots are. And in terms of wildlife habitat, we're not just talking about corridors. These creatures require a certain amount of open space as a block.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that we're doing that. And if we're going to do this thoughtfully, we need to get some professional input on it. Where should this land be open? What about the stormwater management? Before we just say, well, they have a wildlife corridor, they're okay.
I keep thinking back, Judith, you brought up on Packards Falls, that development, it is a conservation subdivision, but it's like kind of what we don't want to do. It's exactly what you're talking, big, really expensive houses now that are kind of cut up into lots, and it's like, okay, it doesn't, while in name it's a conservation subdivision, it doesn't do anything of
But
what you just spoke
It
of.
creates expensive homes, elitist homes. I don't want to insult anybody, but they're big homes, and it does disrupt open space because you've got lawns.
So wouldn't it make sense in I think the idea of the conservation subdivision where you're plunking in really expensive homes, it's nice, but I don't think that's necessarily what we're looking for.
It's not.
I think when we think about the conservation subdivision, we wanted to do all the things that you said, but if we're going to use density, it would certainly make sense to have duplexes there and in the cluster so that we can break it up. If we want any hope of, I think we're now at attainability, then we need to use density in terms of what the actual unit looks like. I think if we say, okay, you can go from 3.4 acres to an acre and you can build a house on there, it's going to be like an $800,000 house probably.
Well, what if
so it's not going to work. But if I say you can do a duplex there, we need to do something to at least give us some ability to hopefully. I don't know if we're going to get down to whatever workforce 409 attainability,
That's not gonna happen.
but at least we're in the shoot. We're in like something reasonable. We're going to have to allow the type of unit also is going to have to be addressed.
Well, I think that the first place is to reduce is to increase the density, is to reduce the minimum lot size just like across this, doesn't matter where you're putting it, you're going to reduce the minimum lot size. Paul, you had some thoughts.
I have a thought and a reaction. My reaction was yes, but not exclusive. Because the housing report said, look, we need more housing across the spectrum.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so we don't want to focus simply on attainable housing. We do need to provide that flexibility, but we also want that carrot so that we get both.
Yeah.
And my thought, and keep in mind, I'm throwing thoughts out today because today's a brainstorming session. With regards to, I don't want to use subdivision because subdivision implies, but
That's
the
what it's
whole idea of building out in the cluster format, we have maximum impervious surface ratio.
Yeah.
All right, so the maximum impervious surface ratio for our RC and R units are ridiculous. You shouldn't even quote, that's a whole lot in the faculty neighborhood. basically, is what we're saying you can make impervious in one of these lots in our rural zone. But if we think of that more as, that's my developable space. My developable space that I could put as many units as I want on, as long as I keep it within that 20% of my overall lot size, that begins to make more sense. There's a guardrail there
Yeah.
that we could potentially play with in terms of trying to decide, how do we want to make this allowance? And with the whole idea of we want that to be a more or less contiguous space, because that way 80% of this lot is being kept in the wild.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, do we have a,
And if you can run the numbers here, and it works for most of our 4 residential zones. I mean, because that would give me in a minimum sized rural lot, 30,000 square feet. In the RC, the number works out to about the same. In the RB, that gives me 9,000 feet as my build out area. And it's 5,000 in RA, which is about what I think most of the people are already at.
That makes sense.
so you're saying
I'm saying that's a starting point, that we
Yeah.
could use that as, because we were
instead of,
arguing earlier about how many, how much, where is it, how do you keep it from sprawling out? This is a way to keep it from sprawling out.
Plus, it gives you an anchor, Paul. It's like it's the regulation is tied to something, which is impervious surfaces, so it makes sense. Rather than just randomly saying we think, oh, it's 40,000 square feet or something. That's a much better way to do it, I think.
so I think it'd be, since we are just brainstorming, it would be worth kind of creating some examples of what that would look like in say, it's like one of these lots.
Sure.
And then saying, okay, so if you did that kind of thing in.
Why don't we take the O'Keefe property as our example? That would be a good one since it's already
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah,
And in everybody's mind, we could do that with the O'Keefe property and say, hey, here would be the option C, right? Under this idea, and
to creating single-family homes and the types of things.
right, and so 20%, that's a 100, how many acres is that lot?
117.
117. So 117 acres at 20% divided by 5 would give you 23, roughly, acre driveways and houses to go into. So
And
you're taking
then-
about 20, you're taking 23 acres of that O'Keefe property somewhere, probably off of Route 4,
Yeah.
right? And the bulk of it would probably be that part that you can see going up the hill, because it has to stay off of the creek.
Yep.
All right, because Johnson Creek's coming down
Right.
that right side. So it's going to go in there, you're going to have 23 acres, and what can you put in there? Well, you could put in a couple, a mix now of single-family houses, two-family houses, a set of townhouses.
Duplexes,
But
quadplexes.
at that point, it becomes developer's playground, the architect's playground.
Yeah.
So how would that differ than if they did it as a
If they were, so option A is conservation subdivision, which right now gets them 11 units,
which gives them, and not,
Senior,
and so we
yeah.
wouldn't
11 senior units.
touch
or-
them. This would be something
And-
completely different.
Or they subdivide the 117 acres into like 9 or 10, or what was it?
Regular
Units,
homes,
yeah. So,
non-senior.
Or, well, no, it'd be like 20 or, because, so the O'Keefe property might actually be a candidate for where a true,
And we're only using that property as an
where
example.
the conservation subdivision actually reduces the potential of how many units can go on there, as opposed to if that was simply a bunch of a traditional subdivision.
That particular piece of property as a
Because
conservation
I think that's the place where it
subdivision
breaks down.
Yeah, as a conservation subdivision, they don't get very much.
Well, when you go in and you count how much has to come out that you're not
Right.
allowed to count.
Yeah.
Right? But
There's not a lot left. I think it was, 9 houses, wasn't it, on regular conservation subdivision? Or was that under the
Something, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that we're better off just to kind of look at, do we gain more by tweaking conservation subdivision density? Or are we going to keep that as allowed to stay just the way it is? Or do we then create a different, how would you be?
if you want to just tweak conservation subdivision, you remove the percentage. It shouldn't be a percentage of what the underlying lot allows.
Right.
This is sort of what brought me into this direction. What it should be is you're saying,
A
hey,
regular, just a
if you're
number.
doing a conservation subdivision, then you're putting X amount of space out into, and really that could be the density
That
rule
could
we
be-
use for
Yeah.
conservation subdivision.
that would actually probably.
Is you have
yeah.
this amount of space. It's not how many units are you allowed, it's how much space are
You're
you
allowed
allowed
to
to
build.
work on.
Yeah.
Right, you can decide what kind of units fit in this. In other words, it's kind of like Sim City. We've given you a 30,000 square foot lot. You decide what fits in there, but we want to conserve the rest of the parcel. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
So instead of saying with a conservation subdivision, instead of saying the minimal usable per acre is whatever is going on in that district, which is, I think is absurd when it comes to some of it, the 3 acres on, that's not a subdivision. But instead of that, the minimum developable, say minimum developable area is going to be based on maximum impervious ratios.
Yeah.
And then let the developer figure out what that mix, and then allow duplexes and fourplexes and single-family homes.
And anything you
Yes.
do in the open spaces is not allowed to create impervious
Right.
surface, because
Yeah.
that comes up, your impervious
Right.
surface ratio has to be.
Right.
If you wanted to have something over there, like some trails or whatever, those trails come out of your impervious surface.
But yeah, and it has to
Calculation.
be clustered in specific clusters. We'd have to
Yeah.
somehow.
A lot of this is already in the conservation subdivision. It's
It's just-
well written. There's a few, the big problem is the allowed density is so low, nobody uses it. So the question for this town is, do you want to keep doing this? The density is so low and the process is also burdensome in all the rural zone, as well as RC, but I think rural is the key area.
Yeah.
It's not as sensitive as RC. In the rural zone, which is, on that map there, it's the yellow, which is almost half the town.
Yeah.
It's the lion's share of residential land. There's a lot of large parcels. So the question for this community
It's all
is,
this yellow.
are you set, under the current density, no one's developing. You'll get a single-family house cut off here or there. And is that what the town wants? No development in the bulk of the rural area? Or do you want to see more development because you want to see the town grow a little, you want some housing diversity, you want some housing opportunity? That's the question. And if it's the latter, then we tweak the density to allow more density while keeping all the open space. But frankly, it surprises me, I've said this before, other than very few people, I do not get property owners coming into my office and saying, I have 20 acres of land in the rural zone, I can't do anything with it. I don't like that, is it legal? I'd like to create some housing, but I can't. I don't get a lot of that,
No,
a little bit. But so what is this, but the ordinance we have now is effectively, no meaningful development is occurring in the rural zone. And maybe that's what a lot of people want. Or do people feel we can still protect open space and create more housing? And what is it that people will support?
Well, I think having the option available, I think people buy their little their own little pieces of Idaho, so to speak. It's just like, they have that land they want it, they may not want to develop it, but that is in their hands now, who knows how, as it goes along, and people, say 10, 20 years or whatever. But I think that what we have now just really just creates more expensive homes. And so for the conservation subdivision to be of actual use and benefit and do what it should be doing by creating housing and preserving, because you can't just build over the rural. There's a reason why people move to the rural area. And granted, you can see all that light yellow in that map, that's all rural, that's like half the town. But there's a reason why people choose to live there.
When I think about the rural area there, we definitely don't want to cut it up into like really expensive home lots. That's just not a great idea. And I think what you've seen is that the conservation subdivision doesn't work. I think a lot of the landowners that are in the rural area, especially those farms, they don't want their farm cut up into like 1 acre, $1 million houses. That's
No, they don't.
depressing beyond belief. So I think they currently don't have the flexibility in the ordinance to get, a clustered development where you can build, you can't even build any missing middle housing in all of that area, which doesn't make any sense. So the concept really is, especially for some of these farmers, is can I build a small clustered development and preserve the rest of my farm? And I've heard that come up repeatedly, and our current ordinance does not really allow that at all.
It does because there's not enough density.
Yeah, it's not enough. So it's like, so saying that
Increase
no
the
one is
density.
coming to you. Part of the reason is that you have taken a lot of their options off the table for really doing what they would likely want to do with their land, or what I think a lot of our conservation people want to do with the land as well. So I think it's worth our time to rethink what that looks like, the option.
I would like to bring up the topic of conservation easements. I don't know whether, like within 3 properties of us, there are 180 acres under conservation. I don't know whether when you were calculating the number of available lots, did that subtract the ones that were under conservation easement and therefore are not developable? The other thing is that, say a farmer wants to preserve most of his land. In certain circumstances, he can be paid market value for that land. He can exclude several lots for future development or future investment for his family, etc. But I'm thinking, in this scenario, it's the individual property owner that is deciding the land use of that big property. It has nothing to do what the town's regulations are. So I think we need to keep that situation in mind.
For the conservation.
But the thing is,
It wouldn't be subject to a conservation subdivision. It would be land that is just being
Easement.
taken out of the developable land and perhaps leaving a certain number of lots,
That they can
or actually an area
to build.
to
I
build.
think the thing is we're trying to incentivize, it's kind of incentivizing the person to want to do that. By allowing him to do density, it makes it so the lots make him some money, hopefully, but then the land that we really want to conserve is conserved. So I think the reason that the town regulations are important because it changes his choices. If his only choices is like, look, I'm going to do a conservation easement and then build $1 million house here, that's not, or $2 million houses, whatever. That's not such a great thing. But if I can do a conservation easement and build like 2 duplexes there or something that we can get density that really does make a little bit more sense, that's going to the town has to change its zoning so the ordinance actually allows it. So that gives the homeowner more options what he's going to do.
It's my experience, I've worked for 20 years in land conservation, and it's my experience that when they're cutting off an area to be excluded from the easement, they're not talking about, I want to build, maximize the amount of property,
Value.
values or set. that they can get out of it, of lots that they can get out of it. They're just saying, I want to retain this for future use, either for a future investment or for family members. But they don't look at it and say, well, how can I get 3 lots versus 5 lots?
No, yeah.
That is done when the land is being appraised for what say the state is paying for it. They will decide how many lots, excluding the wetlands, et cetera, is the market value of that property. So that's where that comes in. But it rarely comes down to the property owner to think in very concrete terms about what they could get for the land that they're retaining.
It will, once they start to sell it, they'll be like, oh, what can I get for
Well,
this
the
land? Or what
the
can I
first
do?
build, but later on, depending upon what the owners,
Yes and no. Because what is going to go in next to me is often a person's concern when they decide to
Right.
subdivide and sell.
Yeah, for sure.
And if they want their privacy, if they're getting ready to just simply sell out and they subdivide to sell one piece.
And move.
And then they're going to move and sell the second piece, they don't care.
Yeah.
But if they plan on staying there or passing it down and they want to keep their privacy,
Yeah.
then, they're going to sell it to, Southeast Land Trust or somebody like that,
Yep.
as opposed to out to somebody who might develop it.
Yeah, that's on Wednesday Hill Road, right? Didn't we, who bought that? They bought along the, is that along the Lamprey where they bought the chunk of land, the homeowner retained?
A lot of the Lamprey coastline's been going that way. There's been a couple of pieces out on Durham Point Road recently that have done that. I mean, that was one of the subdivisions that we dealt with this fall, was exactly that. Piece on Durham Point Road, they kept 5 acres and the other 100 acres went to sell. Or whoever it was, one of the conservation land trusts.
Well, the question is, if you look at this page that I handed out, this is, these are the things that were in that proposed ordinance that were covered. So how do you want to proceed? Do you want to propose a few simpler things like pertaining to ADUs? Do you want to put a package of things together like you did the last time? Do you want to hold off till the workforce housing is finished? There's also a proposal now to change the student housing 3 unrelated rules with a public hearing on January 8th, and I think there'll be a lot of public comment on that, and I'm a little concerned that if you put something else through at the same time, people will put them together in their
Well,
minds.
I would, there's nothing stopping us from preparing something, but from the planning board's viewpoint, we're not putting anything new out until March or later. We
we
just
can
don't have the time.
yeah, we can, and we.
Not
and
enough cycles on the clock.
And we don't have enough time right now to even get it, I think looking at it, we certainly need to, it's obvious we need to look at, as far as our go-to list, we need to look at conservation subdivisions. We need to kind of, the conservation subdivision, the change of density, or we need to tweak that.
I would like to see that first.
Yeah, I think that,
And I think
agree.
that,
Density modification, I think we should evaluate that first.
Yeah.
I mean, on initial glimpse, it looks promising. We need to dig into it, we should dig
Yeah.
into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And
I
try to
agree.
put together something that works. 'Cause
Um,
I think that becomes, because we could potentially apply that to R, RC, RB,
I think it's I think it has.
even RA. We have a few lots in RA where it could pertain as well.
Yeah, and it holds the most value as far as quality.
When I look at this, first of all, I was laughing when you said there's going to be people coming to the public hearing for the student housing one, because that really is a pretty significant change. But I think in terms of, because when I look up at the top, like duplexes hit my mind, I think we need to do the student housing thing before we do some of the other densities, because it'll take the fear of student housing sprawling off the table, so we can have a rational conversation about like duplexes and things like that. I agree with you about the conservation subdivisions. That really is an interesting one. The accessory unit dwellings, let's say it's gonna go through the state. It's like, it's moving, it'll
We
get
should just put
assigned.
it through anyway.
Yeah, we'll know more about, to Paul's point, we'll know more about that by March, where we are. And hopefully by then, please, you will have done something to the student housing ordinance and we'll get through and we'll be set up, but you're just not gonna be ready to do it with all you got on the table right now. I think.
And I think that just like looking at this list, I mean, I think there's single-family residence, I don't really want to, personally, I don't want to touch, I think we'll get into trouble if we start tweaking the minimum lot sizes overall. I think we leave them as it is, but tweak them in the conservation subdivision. That's my opinion. I think we should make duplexes allowed. We certainly have had a lot of good feedback from duplexes
Yep.
in town.
Wait, that they should be allowed?
Yes.
Duplexes should be allowed. Accessory dwelling units, we should just follow what the state's gonna say, and we should allow a detached, and maybe even go up on the size by 1,000 square feet. That should just be, so what we do. The multi-unit residence, I think we need to really look at that, and we should need to decide where it should be. And what we're talking about with multi-unit residents, the fourplexes, where we should allow them. I think all of these things is going to be, the density for multi-unit residential, I think the amendment, the overlay, doesn't that kind of address that too? I mean,
Only for the only
the workforce,
overlay area.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
But we
its
could
own thing.
look at that, but we could look at what that density is and then consider that density could be something we could look at. And the conservation in workforce housing, I'm not even know.
That's one that we're,
You've
you've done that one.
That one,
Yeah,
yeah, and
you've
as
done
far
that.
as that, I think it is time to just like lose that terminology too.
yeah, probably it'll be changed to affordable housing. Or attainable housing in the ordinance.
I
think,
liked-
you know,
I
Because
liked
the town attorney actually wisely recently said, because this is different from the state's workforce housing.
Yeah, it's just the
So we should
wordage.
have a different name, so there's not confusion.
Yeah, I think that.
We talked about it
We did,
earlier.
we did
but
talk.
people didn't want to do it, but
Yeah.
she recently said, oh, you really ought to, so.
Yeah.
I
At the
think that would
council
be-
level, I think we're going to do that.
But isn't it attainable by whom?
Well, or the words these days, it should either be affordable or the word these, I mean, I don't know,
Attainable.
Taylor, what do you
I
think?
wouldn't use affordable though.
What?
I wouldn't use affordable.
I would.
Affordable is-
I would
Attainable.
use attainable.
Yeah.
because
I would use attainable.
is
Really?
That's the
Sounds
most
more
reliable
hopeful.
word, like
How about
word we have.
public housing?
It's what?
Well, if public housing is different. Because
Public
often-
housing has a bad
Exactly.
connotation.
Well, public
Yeah.
housing and affordable housing are both oftentimes subsidized housing, whereas workforce housing has a million definitions. Attainable housing has almost no definitions, so
Yeah.
you can put something into
It's
that.
aspirational.
Whereas like workforce housing has a
Right.
definition in New Hampshire by the state.
it's- and
affordable
it's-
housing also probably has a definition somewhere, but I would use attainable because it doesn't.
Yeah,
So we're
For
still
our-
defining-
So for our, this ordinance we put through, we're calling workforce housing, you would call it attainable, not
I
affordable.
mean,
Yeah.
I would just
Yeah.
because.
Yeah.
Well, as long
Yeah.
as we define what that level is.
We
by
did.
the-
It means that
Attainable
people,
just means attainable by more people.
people can actually afford, there are many more, not everyone is going to be able to afford it, but the word attainable means that people can get there. They still may be, when they first buy that home or get that rent, they may be paying
The-
50 to 60% of
the
their
only-
income, but they can get in there and then they
Whereas
can,
affordable housing is not supposed to be more than 30% of your income.
Yeah.
With the whole idea of, the idea is diverse. We want a greater diversity in the
Yeah.
housing stock.
the-
So maybe diverse housing.
well, actually, at the last meeting that I presented to at the Human Rights, Deborah gave I'm going to go back and watch it. I don't know if it was on DCAT. She actually came up with, she suggested, she said this workforce housing, member, Deborah Hirschmeyer.
Oh, yeah,
And I
yeah.
may be saying that name wrong.
Deborah Hirschmeyer
Yeah,
on the
Mayor.
Human Rights Committee.
She worded it really well, and I'm like, that's actually really good. And it was more diverse housing mix. And it was just a better description of really what it is and really what we should be attaining for, because people are thinking it's going to be subsidized housing, it's going to be low-income housing, and it's not. It's just anybody can live there.
And when you look at
Yeah.
the types of housing
As long as you have
styles we
money.
said we'd like to be
Yeah.
included in it,
Funny to-
it fits that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's a different thing from the affordable housing, which is defined by income, right?
Yeah, and it's just hard, to be quite honest with you,
Definitions, yeah.
to be quite
It
honest with
depends
you.
if it has like a capital A or a lowercase.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
to me, I brought this up earlier, I believe, which was that since you guys are using fair market at the top of the voucher, it differs from workforce housing. So I wouldn't use the term workforce housing, I would use attainable housing. It is aspirational, sounds more hopeful, but I would do that just to give you an out until at such point the state redefines workforce housing to include the top of the voucher, which it should anyway, but we're slow. But I mean, in terms of going forward, I think, there's only a certain amount of work, and we already have the subgroup that's working on the downtown, which is, to be honest, really challenging as we started talking about it. And I think that we're not going to be able to get with the community until we get that student housing definition in. It's going to be hard to deal with the increased density. And again, that's why I would circle back down to Paul's idea on the conservation subdivision. I thought has a lot of merit. We don't have a lot of, you guys are bombed out and don't have a lot of time, but if that's something that we could work on in addition to the downtown.
Well,
to be
that's
ready.
the other thing. Anything we put through that's small, that where we don't have to go through a tremendous amount of pages to evaluate,
Yeah,
makes it easier to go through.
yeah,
You know, it's something that we can take and pass. Work
Yeah.
on it for a night or two, pass it on. As opposed to something like it took a year for the overlay district.
and the downtown's not going to be any, it's harder.
And that's only 8 pages. Took us a year to get through 8 pages
Yeah,
of changes.
Well, I wonder, the planning board, as you know, is doing a zoning rewrite, and they're going through section by section. They finished the definitions, which was a big one. That's with the council now. And the board has talked about doing table of uses, but I'm not sure what the next thing is. You know, they could do conservation subdivisions as the next thing.
yeah.
Well, I
might
mean,
be-
that's
might
just.
be worthwhile.
I think if we're gonna do
Yeah,
that, I
but-
mean, we're looking at, that should be, I guess
That
also.
one's been on our short list for
What-
quite a while.
Yeah, what are we presenting to the planning board? We're going to
Yeah.
present list of what you should look at. I think, and if we can present, this might be something you should consider,
Yeah.
these different options. And we don't necessarily have to give you, the planning board, one option on it. We could say, in conservation subdivision, you need to increase the density, these are some suggestions, now you go take it.
Well, I
And then we're
wonder,
done.
Sally, that's an interesting idea. What I've sort of been thinking is, hearing you, that it would be a good goal to have a set of amendments to the planning board, like around
Suggestions.
March.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But then maybe I wonder if it's worth just having a conversation with, this similar conversation with the planning board and saying, what do you think?
I
don't
think
know.
we have, no, I
Well,
think we have to have suggestions written down and then say, here,
Yeah, I mean,
this is
if-
what we're suggesting, go for it, we're
We're
done.
Doesn't necessarily have to be a full draft, but a draft of a couple of the areas that we
Yeah.
think in the conservation subdivision area should be changed and how,
yeah.
brought to the planning board would sort of kickstart us.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
like we did with the other two things,
Yeah.
the workforce overlay and the soon to be discussed.
Well, why
three
don't we-
unrelated. I think if we could come forward and introduce it to the planning board to say, we think this is worth your time, and, please put this at the, top of your list, and it'll give the planning board a heads up, and you guys can then schedule it to where you think you can actually handle it.
Do you know what I'm saying? You
Yeah,
just like,
I-
let's create some little packages to say, we're
Yeah.
giving you this. And I think maybe the conservation subdivision separate from like ADU, should all these be separate? Because conservation
Yes,
subdivision
yes.
is just a bigger
Yes.
thing.
But planning board
We
could
should
do
work
that
on
as a
one, get
next
it,
project.
and then
Right,
send
but
it, work on one,
but, you
send
know,
it.
I agree.
we're talking about it here, we can create a suggestion, send it to them, And then they can, and the reality of, it's December now, in the January meeting, we might be able to start really getting in, or.
No.
No, at this, here.
No, no, no.
No, not at planning board, here.
Okay, yeah.
Here, I'm not talking about planning board, no.
Well,
Because we have to create the piece, we have to create the suggestion, we have to put this in, so that it's written down.
Yep.
We can start to discuss that at the next meeting here, firm it up, and so you're really looking at
February.
probably end of February, March, anyways, to present it to the planning board.
I think that makes sense. You know, what I was thinking
I mean,
before
is
is.
that timing
you-
better for, I mean,
Well, it depends how long
Yeah,
student
so
rentals
if we
takes.
can draft something out, and maybe we can work, a couple of us can work offline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that we have a draft to start looking at next
Yeah.
meeting. And then we look at it, we like it, maybe we send it to the planning board or not. It won't really matter, because it's not going to really hit the planning board's agenda till February.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't see it hitting our agenda prior to February, because
Well, it
we
wouldn't
got-
even be ready
You're busy.
until.
we
before
got
February, yeah.
two projects showing up that are going to start chewing time, and one of them, I'm hoping one of them won't take too long. I'm hoping they both don't take too long, because they shouldn't, but
Well, then what's our net?
each one has its own little things that people are going to want to look at.
As far as an action item right now, when it comes to the conservation subdivision, that is probably let's put something together for the planning board. Do you want some,
Should we come back, say,
Paul and Michael, maybe Paul and Michael, you can start to formulate some, and then we can discuss it at the January meeting, we can firm it up at the January meeting, and then we can send it to planning board sometime in February.
yeah.
Yeah, I would wait till, you might want to wait till they finish student rental, because if it's caught up in student rental, I think people will mix, oh gee, what are they doing? They want to make these changes to student rentals and three unrelated, and they're also throwing out all
Yeah.
these changes.
well-
I think we want to keep them on a different.
And that's the issue. I already have 3 public hearings for January 8th.
Yeah.
So this, we're not,
We can still do
you're not
those.
going to get this
So I'm-
until February,
Exactly,
March.
that's what I say. I don't want this to come to the planning board
Until-
before February.
Okay.
It
that's
won't
no
be
problem.
ready, because
It
we
won't
don't
be
even have
ready
any
till then.
language.
No,
yet.
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Even if we get all the language like in a way that we like it at the next meeting, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't
No, but
wanna
I think
send
we
it
should wait. I think
prior
we should
to-
wait till February.
If we send it, I'm going to delay it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
I usually pull this kind of a trick at 5 minutes before 12. But
You're early.
Well, we might
just
be able to
wanna-
finish early.
I'm losing track of the focus of what we're doing. At one point, we were talking about trying to get in, to deal with the lack of affordable housing. Now we're dealing with diversity, and we're dealing with it about housing supply in general. And I think that, you know, the elephant in the room remains, particularly with affordable housing, but with both, is what do developers want to see in order to have an incentive to come in? Have we talked to enough developers for them to tell us changing the conservation subdivision
Yes.
would be an incentive? You know, giving us more density here.
Yes, definitely.
Have we gotten that kind of input so
We
that
have.
Yes.
We
we
have.
know exactly, because that's our goal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be an incentive to developers.
From several, yes.
But we need,
several.
actually, to that point, because we did.
We need way more density.
Sally and I met, actually, and I'm losing track, I think it was last week, I don't remember
Last
anymore.
Thursday. Last Thursday.
But it was like, we met with Tom Toy and talked to him, and I thought it was a pretty interesting.
And Tom Toy is Arthur Thomas, property management, that's that guy, and he's lives in Durham, and he, actually, the barn down here, what is it?
Is he a realtor or is he involved with
He's a
development?
realtor, he's
All-
property management.
All of the above. So it was like, so I thought it was an interesting conversation.
developed. He's-
But it certainly did spark that we need to talk to more. He gave us some other names to talk to, and so we're clearly not done. I mean, to be honest, I'm pretty impressed thus far how we're going with the downtown, even though we've had one meeting. We started off wisely with the stormwater management, which was kind of a non-negotiable. We did meet once and kind of through just some basic ideas of zoning stuff, and then I have just started talking to developers, and I think there's a lot more to be done there. And again, I think that's why it's going to be time consuming. But I think in terms of the conservation subdivisions, we have a pretty good idea already.
I saw an interesting forum, and Chinberg was one of the people who were speaking. I don't know if you guys saw it. He had some very interesting things to say. A lot of it had to do with the funding, the financing of it.
For sure.
Can he develop it quickly enough to maintain a minimum of delay between the time he comes out with his cost and the time he gets his money?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking we're kind of shooting in the dark if we think it has to do with zoning. And Chinberg thinks that what needs to be changed is the financing.
Well, that's why you do housing champions, because housing champions is more holistic. I think we know firsthand it's not just zoning, because we changed the zoning downtown and nothing happened. And so it's like the infrastructure, the financing, all of those are tied together. And so it's you're trying to put yourself in the best position to cover all your bases. If you only do one, you may not get there. But if you do the palette of stuff that's in the housing champions, you put yourself in the best position to try to do it, because you've already addressed infrastructure and finance are part of that, as well as zoning. So I think we're farther down the road now with where we are and our discussions about zoning changes and affordability. I mean, I think our focus still is affordability. We're just trying to figure out how to get there.
Well, this is the other thing that it keeps coming back to. In order to induce people to put up housing that is less profitable, are we having to talk about subsidies? And I think a lot of places have to offer some kind of incentive for a developer to want to get involved with this. Have we talked about that?
Well, the reality, Judith, is what we actually are capable of doing when it comes to carrots, so to speak. First of all, if we don't have the density that even makes it possible, they're not even going to try. They have to have the ability to create more. So density is something that we completely control by zoning.
Yeah.
Other than that, when it comes to, other types of carrots that may involve like 79E or creating TIFs or something like that, that is something we'd have to take into consideration and be more open to than we are right now. But that's not going to be part of zoning. That's going to be part of the administration of the town. And
that's a separate presentation.
It's a separate thing.
It is,
And we can't.
It might be really the most critical thing that is
Yes,
affecting the
yeah.
building of housing.
It is, ultimately, because you said, what is the housing task force doing? So, we have focused a lot on zoning changes, but and when we had our discussion about the downtown, of course, 79E came up and redoing the definition of 79E. And I think, and the TIF are going to come up, but I think we're not going to be presenting that to the planning board. We need to go to the town council and talk about, how they're using the TIF, 79E, and that's a separate conversation that we haven't actually even talked about.
Yeah. Putting
together yet another presentation, but we're going to have to do that for sure.
And that's something that we're really, when it comes to downtown, that's something we're starting to look at. But it should reflect in any type of housing there. But if we don't have density, they're not even going to look.
No.
And that's 100% controlled by housing. By zoning. And that's where we have the power to make those changes here. And it's again, that's the only thing we can do. We can't change the banking system, but the reality is, and this is something that I need to understand, that nothing gets built if the numbers don't. Mike Mulhern, you're probably the expert on this.
Totally.
Nothing gets built if the bank doesn't say, sounds good to us. You have any comments on that, Mike?
Yeah, I think, a lot of this also works on tax credits and I think Judy had mentioned that, what kind of subsidies. I don't think the subsidies really come from the town. The subsidies really come from the number of units and the income brackets that we are focused on to achieve tax credit There's 4% tax credit, there's 9% tax credits, and that's what's utilized, that's what's needed for an affordable housing development. I mean, the one that we're working on with Service Credit Union in Portsmouth, we really have estimated that 50% of the cost needs to be subsidized, and one of which is the land acquisition that Service Credit Union will offer to the development. Approximately 20% of that 50% comes from the land acquisition, and yeah, so it needs to pencil. If in fact it does not pencil, you're not going to get tax credits, you're not going to get developers, and it's all based on density in units.
You know, Mike, I heard that actually Conway was talking about that, because one of the things in legislation that they're talking about moving forward is utilizing county land, similar to what you did. And they said just giving the land alone in density, and this speaks to your 20% of land, it wasn't enough to pencil, just the land and the density alone. They needed more to actually make the project work, it was kind of eye-opening.
Oh, it's incredibly challenging. You know, even when you have the ability for zoning to increase density and number of units, just getting the 9% tax credits in New Hampshire, there's only 40 million available in 2025, and it's very, very, very competitive. Yeah. So, 4% tax credits are not as competitive, but it doesn't bring nearly the equity that a 9% tax credit would. So, and then there's gap financing, there's PACE, there's a lot of different organizations. The good thing about it is the conversation is changing, and there are available subsidies out there, but really it's based on number of units. You can't do this without a significant unit count.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's yeah.
But
You got anything
Judith,
to
and
add?
also, I think to respond to, I think you were asking, in my view, the workforce housing ordinance, which I think is looking pretty good at this point, is about units being available at a affordable level. And that's written into our ordinance. But in my opinion, everything else that we will be doing, most likely, possibly with an exception, but most likely is not about creating affordable housing or workforce housing. It is about creating more housing opportunities and also encouraging missing middle types of housing, more than just single family and big apartments. It's duplexes, row houses, etc. But I think that, in my view, the goal at this point is just creating more and more opportunities and more variety and diversity, and not worrying about limiting costs and rental. That's kind of beyond us. Our job is, through zoning and density, to just create more opportunities.
And what developers are really looking for out there is the density, and to create as much housing as possible, because that's the numbers are how they make their money. I mean, Taylor, you're waving your head, yes, yes, yes. So do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I just think unfortunately that's the reality right now, is like, in order to bring the cost down on any single unit, you have to have a pretty significant amount of density. And what we're seeing in a lot of places is that even with a higher density level, the cost per unit is not coming down to an affordable or even workforce level naturally. It has to be sort of a subsidy, or it has to be a very specific situation in a very specific place. But I do think the more density that you can allow for, and maybe doing that in a way that, like, I like what you're talking about with the 20% versus the 80% of lot size, because if you can, the thing that makes me nervous about that is, like, there are a few ways to incentivize that becomes a denser area, because if you say you change your conservation subdivision to allow for, like, you can build on 20% of this, that could still be single family homes. People could still put single family homes there, and oftentimes that is the highest bang for your buck you can get, especially in a place like Durham, where you can get people to pay more for housing. And so I think that makes me a little nervous, but I do think that the more you can incentivize density in a space, the more opportunities there are for developers to come in and put in a number of units that will allow them to make, say, the same amount that they might on a single family or only slightly less with a higher density of people living there. And I think that's sort of, as much as I'd love to be saying like affordability above all, and in my heart I am, that is a lot harder to access without the subsidies that Mike's talking about. And even with those subsidies, it's just tough to hit those numbers.
You know what's funny is like when we, in the much maligned, I'll call it RKG report, it spoke to that people in Durham had more money. Theoretically, they would have bought more house, but the house wasn't available. And so they went for the less house and boxed out somebody else. And so that's to your point, Michael, like we really do need more housing in general. I think the diversity of housing that we open up will help as well.
You know, go ahead.
I think any way that you can find to incentivize developers to build, say, a duplex instead of a single family, you know,
Yes.
anything that would allow for that is the kind of thing that really encourages. I mean, if you can get 2 homes where you could get 1, that's still 2 instead of 1. And that, you know, it does make a difference for someone who's looking to move into Durham.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the supply of housing is, nationwide is off. Statewide, we're looking at creating more housing. I think that the expectation that all housing has to be workforce housing is not even realistic, because the numbers to get to that 30%, just the cost
Insane.
of labor and the availability, the lack of availability of labor, the cost of the supplies, and
Land.
tariffs on lumber coming in from Canada the next few years may make it even worse. But it costs a lot to build in the first place, and even with subsidies, it's still very, very challenging. And so really what you're getting is housing that is going to have a market rate of X. And that's going to be based on what it costs to build. And so you'll have more people moving into that, which again will then free up
That's the hope.
some of the
Yeah.
existing. There's a reality about supply and demand, and that's kind of what we're playing catch up. But I don't think this area is not going to become an affordable, a cheap or inexpensive place to live. The Seacoast is an expensive place to live. It's not going to get cheaper. You can rent an apartment now cheaper in Manhattan than you can here in Durham. With you, for them to dramatically fall, we're all suffering badly. So,
Well,
Mike.
I think my last comment on this is, to make an affordable housing development work, you need an influence of market value housing also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's that's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
the other good thing about, conservation cluster is anything that can be done to bring down costs to a developer, such as having duplexes, and even having conservation, their infrastructure is less. At the same time, that can bring down the value a little bit. Now, for a lot of people, a single-family house on a half-acre lot in a cluster is less appealing than a big house on 5 acres on the water.
Yeah,
But
people are gonna-
that'll be more affordable, and also will therefore bring more diversity to Durham. We don't need a lot more huge houses on 5 acres on Oyster River, although we love the tax money for it.
But Taylor's,
I think fewer people want the big house on 5 acres. Just
I think so too.
as someone who might never own a house, and as a younger person, I don't see a lot of people that I know saying, I want to own a house on 5 acres and I want it to be huge.
This boils down to who do you talk to in your social circle, right?
That's also true.
So most of the
that's a good
people who are
point.
coming into Durham and buying are 40, 45, 50, 55 years old,
That's true.
right? They have reached the cusp of their career. They've had 20 years worth of asset growth, they're not looking at a small little apartment yet at this point in time.
They might be though.
But their kids who they just left the nest, probably are.
Uh, I think people, Victorians, and they're pretty close together even for Victorians. So wealthy people never used to say, hey, I want my 5 acres. And, wealthy people it was, where am I on the hill? How far on the hill am I? Am I on the high street or am I on River Street? There's a difference. And those actually, everybody's got that road name. That changed when zoning came in, and suddenly people say, well, we have this zoning that, with these 3 acres, that's an environmental protection thing. But it also, for many people look at it and say, well, that's
Snob zoning.
a snob zoning. Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, if you've got the money, you can have the better part, and the rest of you, I don't know where you're going to live, it's your problem. But so that's how it's looked at. We have a lot of, if you can afford the big house, that's wealth. If you can't afford $1,500 for rent, that's a different thing. And so we have to start looking at it that way rather than the reality is that is snob zone.
So I'll answer your question. The 5-acre house, I'm a semi-privileged individual, so I don't want a bigger house than my current house, but I have a second house, so that's even worse, I guess. And I don't want that to be big. That's on water, and I think surprisingly enough, a lot of demographic in Durham is also in that same boat. They've been able to, they're like, I have a house up on Maine, or I have up in somewhere farther away, and I do this second house thing, and do I need a bigger house? There certainly are. If you go to some developments on Durham Point Road, they will show you clearly what to have not even a 5-acre sitting on the Great Bay is a pretty steep price to pay.
But if they are able to do it, that's great, and that's their choice. And that's wonderful, but I think that when we're looking at heating these larger homes and maintaining these larger homes and income levels, I think the reality is that people are starting to see that a smaller footprint, even the energy efficiency, smaller footprints are the way to go. And the days of these big old mansions on big pieces of property are going to be probably still happen, but they're not going to be necessarily choice.
You can't get the help.
You can't go. Oh gosh, did you just say that?
Yeah, we've been trying to find, servants, Judith.
Don't
We don't have any servants. You cannot get good people now.
I know,
Okay.
and you used to have housing for them.
Taylor is like, she's like, her head is blowing up.
What?
No, I just think like. To your
He's
point
joking.
I know he's joking. We know each other. To your point about like the people that are moving in that can afford these houses, I think if you're 40 or 50 or whatever age you are and you can come in and move into Durham and afford whatever you're looking for, that's great.
Yeah.
I just also have heard in this room concerns about not enough young people, not enough families, not
for
enough,
sure.
and those people can't afford that house.
And that's what we're trying to get in.
Everybody knows that in here. I just think that that's another consideration. It's like
When you have a lot of options, put it this way, the first group that you talked about, they have a lot of options on the table.
Yes.
It's amazing how money clears a lot of barriers to your housing issue. Their own in an apartment that they're paying for. And I was like, yes, that's pretty good. You're not living at home. And the challenges that you guys are facing is significantly higher than we faced. I know we did face a lot of challenges, but you have student debt, and in terms of starting a family and paying for daycare and paying for your mortgage right now, I don't mean to be depressing, but it's kind of punishing. So I think
the numbers are higher than what. Okay, they're forced to pay more than we did.
Yeah, so I get like that lake house that I just told you about. I pay mortgage and taxes $1,700 a month.
Yeah.
So it's like putting it in perspective. So it's like, I think for our generation or that other group, really, we do have we have an obligation to try to hopefully set forward some opportunities for you guys, because we're going to do fine already. So
maybe.
There are, I also see this as like an interesting opportunity. Like I look at this and I'm like, oh, this is really scary and hard, but it's also an opportunity to like rethink the way that people live.
Yeah.
And a lot of younger people,
Yeah.
and again, this is the demographics I'm in, right? But a lot of the people that I know are more willing to like cohabitate or like work with other people to try to maybe like buy a home they can live in with their friends.
Yep.
So I think the more we make space for that, the more it encourages people to be able to do those sort of things and to really rethink the way we're living. Because it's not affordable to have.
It's not realistic.
It's just not realistic.
It's
in the
not
same way that it
realistic.
once was.
Yeah.
And I spent 3 or 4 years doing that.
Yeah, I mean,
right
and
after college. That was definitely the norm for certain careers.
And I think so. I have right now. I live in a 3-bedroom apartment with 4 people, and we pay each like $750, which is great.
Yeah.
We're about to live there with 3 people. I'm about to pay $1,000 a month to live in the bottom half of a house with my partner and our friend, and that's great. I'm glad I have a place to live. you know?
Yeah.
But it's different than like if we were paying a mortgage on a home or on a space where we had a little bit more space to move around. It's just like, I know people who pay $1,500 to live in places that are much worse than where I live. Like it's just, it just really is.
Yeah.
So I think perspective wise, it's, I think a lot about this. I'm like, what does it look like to live in the future? And like, how do we live? And so I think it's good to like re-look at student housing and think about how many people can live in a space. And I hope that, I don't know what perspectives you're expecting to hear at the public meeting, but I would love to maybe be helpful in finding student perspectives. Like, are there students that want to come and speak on that?
Okay. Last public hearing, we got a good range of.
That's good. 'Cause
You know, like the end of Frankenstein where they come with the pitchforks and torches? That's what I'm expecting.
For which one?
The public hearing on the student housing.
On the student housing thing, but it is right. I think that you make a really good point about what's the future of housing versus what's the past of housing. And in Durham, we have a lot of past, but we also, I have found in presenting these housing presentations to people that people in Durham really are thinking about it.
Yeah.
And they're seeing it, and they're realizing density is the word of, density is the word. And they're seeing reality, because this is something that's really hitting everybody. And they see it, and they see their children and their grandchildren having a harder time. And it's funny, because I'm just sitting here, I was just like, I have 3 adults at home.
Okay, well, that's good. Okay.
He's not considered one of the kids. But I have a son who does have his own house on a 3-acre lot in a rural zone. So, but, whatever. But the other 2, the other 3, it's just going to be more challenging because of when this first one did buy his house and everything.
But I just, those last 2 comments I think are really interesting. I mean, with Taylor capturing what we all know here, the huge challenge of housing, especially for young people, and other expenses, childcare, et cetera. And then Sally, you have been giving a presentation to a lot of different groups, and you're getting feedback. And you're just saying you think people in the community are hearing what Taylor is saying.
I think we've had conversations. People have commented that, yes, we need density. Yes, we need, their duplexes make sense. ADUs make sense.
Yeah.
Where multi-family housing is, they see these kind of 4plexes, these townplexes. Where is important, but you got to protect against it becoming student housing and things like that. The concern about footprints, environmental footprints. These are concerns, and so they're seeing that move forward. And I think that there's some things I think it would be a harder lift for some people, but I think that they're willing to look at lower density in, say, conservation subdivisions and duplexes allowed in certain areas, and ADUs. The detached ADU seems to be like the lowest hanging fruit. Like, well, why can't you do a detached if and the downtown, a lot of people do have that. A lot of people have probably I don't want to criticize and say a false understanding of the reality of the present student housing. They're not going to simply roll over into it, well, we were just talking when we were talking to Tom Toy, he's talking about one of the property he manages, which is a student-centered property, and they're needing to change a bit, but they weren't bringing the price down. They were just now marketing more toward graduate students.
Yeah, I mean, the thing
So
that
they're still renting per bed.
yeah, I mean, the landowners aren't going to magnanimously say, or
We'll
the
put money
apartment,
in.
oh, you know what, I'm going to collect less revenue on rent. They were like, they're extremely resistant to doing that.
And there's a reason why they're resistant to doing that, because their finances are
Yeah.
all, I mean, Mike, when somebody comes in and says, I want to borrow some money, because you've got banking experience, I want to borrow some money to do this, and these are the rent levels that I see. You say, great, but they change those rent levels, they're not making their payments.
There's an annual review.
Yeah, so that's the problem, is they can't change. They can't just suddenly say, we're going to charge less. We can rent to you sure, Taylor, come on in, we'll be happy to rent to you at Madbury Cottons. By the way, it's $4,200 a month. Have a wonderful time. Let us know when you're moving in.
Yeah.
Right, which is,
Right, which is why until the vacancy levels hit a really critical level, they're going to keep those rents high.
Yeah.
For sure.
But at the
they
point
have to.
where reducing the rent will be beneficial to their vacancy rate, that's the game they have to evaluate every year.
That's a long way off.
Yeah, for sure.
Another misconception that I think a lot of people have is they think housing should go in the downtown and we can leave everything else alone.
We can't.
That's not realistic. The downtown, when we say downtown, if we mean the 5 commercial core zones, there's not a lot of land there. There are other constraints, and there's only so much you can do. And the idea that, the smart growth puts everything in the center, yes, but there's also what's called a transect. You can't get everything in the center. You have more density, but if we are serious about dealing with housing and providing opportunities and having diversity, it's not going to all happen in the downtown. It's going to happen in RA and RB and rural.
Yeah.
I don't know about residency. And also Orly. So, but hopefully at a lower density and with a lot of open space protected.
Yeah.
because you're not going up. The only way to you're not going up.
We're not going to create
And how-
10-story buildings
Right,
in the
and
Main Street.
that's happening in so many places, and that
Not
makes
this
sense.
decade.
Yeah.
I mean, when we discussed this, when we talked about the downtown, we talked with Tom Toy, that came up, and I was like, okay, because you're going to have to go up.
Right.
But I was
but that
like,
creates a whole
and the
other
question I
cost,
asked him
too.
was like, okay, so let's suppose you go over like the laundromat and you go from 1 story to 4. Who's living in those units you're building? Because they're going to be kind of expensive to do. And one of the things that came up, if you do any expansion of impervious surface, you are looking at water retention. You may even doing it now, you're looking at some kind of water retention for when you hit like a big flood, and that makes it really expensive to build. So that you're going to build 3 floors of housing. Those 2-bedroom units are certainly not going to pencil in at $2,000 a month, which
No.
was your FMR. So it's like, to Mike's point, unless we have some kind of incentives or that to lower, who's living there? And the question I was asking Tom is, because we keep hearing rumblings about it, have we peaked in terms of the student housing? And if we have, student housing has been the most profitable driver that built that, that made it pencil out. And has that peaked? Can you not use that, or can you not depend on that anymore to let the project pencil out with all the cost of going up and the stormwater retention? And I don't think we have an answer to that. So the people who are saying that the downtown's going to solve all of our housing,
It's not.
It's going to be
it's
really,
not.
really, really challenging, I think, is what we've discovered, and there's a lot more work to go into what that looks like.
You can create more housing down, and I think 66 Main Street is a developable property at this point, and probably should be the focus of what we'd like to get downtown. But the reality is only a certain people say, well, people live downtown Dover, people live downtown, you know, in Portsmouth and all these places, but you have to have parking unless, people have to have a car. And they're not going to necessarily, if they work in a walkable distance to their apartment downtown, they're going to be okay with it with a remote parking spot where they can only have to go find it once on the weekend or whatever. But if you're working outside of Durham, you're not going to live downtown Durham because you're not going to trek 2 miles to get your car every day and trek back. It's not going to happen. And so many people just focus on downtown living as people working in the university. That is not, that's only going to fit some. And it may not fit all, especially if they have children, if they have a family. It's not going to be their choice at all. So any housing that happens downtown is probably going to be more graduate student attracted to, or because some graduate students actually have wives and children, or maybe postdocs if they're here for a certain time and they're not attached or don't have any kids, or and students. And that's the, you know, it's a minimal demographic that you really have to market to, and none of them have high-paying jobs.
Yeah, graduate students don't make a lot of money.
So it's
Who doesn't?
Graduate
yeah.
students.
So it's challenging, and you know, maybe over, you know, senior housing over 55 or whatever. But even that, they have to have, even more so, they have to have availability of their cars. So it's challenging downtown, and so it's not the answer. It has to be everywhere. We have to be looking everywhere. Otherwise, we're just creating more snob zoning. Well, you know, millennials, all you want to do is live in the city, right? No,
Well, I guess it depends, yeah.
but not necessarily. But you want a place to put your car. Like living downtown Dover, you have options to put your car in a garage. Portsmouth, you have options to put your car in a garage. Here, if you're lucky, you can get a pass, and where's that going to be? You're going to Depot Road?
Yeah.
You're going to walk 2 miles?
Yeah.
Bring us back, is it, so can, for the January meeting, you guys slap something together for the conservation subdivision thing? At least so
Slap something together.
I
we
mean,
can talk about it,
conceptual, I mean, I guess it's not the best way to, just at least some kind of language so we can sit down and look at what the language looks like in terms of that.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
and then
can-
maybe some ideas, even if they're
I'll
not
work on it.
like, yeah.
I'll go through the whole thing and see where it
Yeah.
needs to get tweaked.
Yeah,
Are we looking at the 13th?
January.
Second Monday?
Sounds
yeah,
like the 13th.
yeah.
Yep, it's 13th.
So that will be after the student housing public meeting, right?
Yes.
That's on the
Yes.
So we'll have some feedback from there.
We'll see the smiling face of all three at the front of the table.
Oh, it'll be
how
fun.
easy it was. They
It'll
were
be great.
Enjoying
surprised.
this, Al.
I
aren't
kind of
you?
am, actually.
It'll be great. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. Anyways, all
I'm
right.
just hoping we have enough time to be able to wrap it up that night on the 8th.
The student housing thing,
Yeah.
or the 4 unrelated.
I'm looking at the agenda for the 8th already, and it's like,
It's a
I'm-
little tight.
I will not know until I walk in and see the audience, the size of the audience, how much work I'm going to get done that night.
I loved your image.
And I may well have to adjust the agenda on the fly when I see the audience.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It could be interesting.
Good to know.
But-
No, well, you, Mill Plaza, and Dunkin' Donuts, all on the same night.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Bring your
Anyways.
garlic.
All right,
So-
well, good
And
discussion.
sorry, but if something has to get bounced, I can't bounce the applications.
Now,
It gonna
I
be
hear
you.
ya.
So that just means